happen once to in the space. So in that sense, but then the story also has its own way of rambling, and in my own story, it's an older brother's wife. Even in Richard's story, where there's conflict, everything going on, there's also love happening. So you can have people who just live for war, or who just live for work. They have connections. This connection is usually sexual or romantic.
Okay. So why love? Because I like to love. And most people also like to love, so that's why we're here. But why love and why cities? For me, it's slightly different from what Tony Khan has said. In the sense that the city is a sort of space that is pushing us outwards from each other. This idea of permissiveness, this idea of experience, this idea of jobs and all those pressures tend to pull us away from each other. We become more mature, we become older, we die, and so on and so forth. So love within a love story, within a story about a city or a story about a city and love tends to, while the city is trying to unravel you, love is something that tries to ravel you back, to try and anchor you in a certain place. So it's inevitable for me, when I was writing City of Memories, that there would be a love story, which is the sole insistence in the book. You've got a lot of pressures, ethnic pressures, religious pressures, political pressures. But the one thing that the characters, the principal characters, Farouk and Rahila,
the next book.
That was not a brilliant thing. That was not a brilliant thing. Please delete it. The one thing that the characters, Farouk Ibrahim and Rahila Pam, insist on from the beginning of the book right through the end is love. Every other thing is arguing for them being different places, for them not being together. So it's a bit inevitable. You can't have a story of a city without a story of love. Because at the end of the day, what is a city really? A city is a cosmopolis with people coming from all over the place to come and make a living, to come and try to become native. And what is more native and what makes us more equal than being in love and loving? So that's my perspective to it.
Something that's been a common thread in this festival has been that even when we're talking about books, we all the conversations always devolve into sort of issues and political instability, or just different kind of sort of multi type of history going on in the country as well. And I often have read somewhere someone said that as an African writer or a person writing about Africa, where our writing is always labeled with some kind of ism. So whether it's tribalism, sexism, racism, some kind of ism of sorts, and which kind of brings this idea of this ability or the ability to be able to just write whatever it is that you want. You both write about cities which can be seen as, I don't want to say frivolous, but, an enjoyable experience of being immersed in a place. At the same time, of course, you all are still compelled to uncover issues and talk about the problems in those spaces. And I think my question right now is really about did you guys struggle with nuance in any way? And how were you able to sort of deal with that? Because you both also address issues within your stories.
I mean, for me, I try not to get into all that message thing. I mean, I say to people, I mean, you don't buy my book to learn anything. Just, if you want to learn, I mean, you can go to school. Just buy it, to enjoy a good story. I mean, when I want moral instruction, I read the Bible, not Tony Khan's book. So for me, I mean, I don't write books to teach anybody anything, about anything. You will find something in it if you're looking for it.
I was going to say that you say that, but you're going through your book.
Yeah.
You point
there.
out a lot of things.
It's there, but it's never overt.
There.
It's there. So if you're looking for it, you will find it. If you want to have a jolly good time, you have it. Because I think that we buy books, we watch movies to escape. And then when we now bring back all the issues you see every day, the quotidian realities of your life, and bring it back into your head in 270 pages, I think you're just being a very wicked person,
I have a tricky. Similar to Tony Khan, I don't wake up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to teach you a lesson about this or that. But because I exist within a social space and I am acting within this social space, which is also counteracting on me as a person within this society, there are definitely certain things that are of interest to me. There are certain bees in my bonnet, as it were. In central Nigeria, I was born in Kano, but the upbringing was done in Jos. And most of us who are from Jos, you meet us all over the place. From probably you'll find us in the United States. The city that we grew up in has become lost to us. What we have now is not exactly home anymore. So, and this and the politics and the tensions of the same city, these inevitable tensions that every city has, are a part of the story of that loss. So when I was writing this book, it was important for me to also get these concerns across. But I did not set up to tell you my concerns, but to sort of create a fictional space into which I'm trying to beckon you to enter, such that when you enter this space, if I've done my job properly, you would be able to understand me, my times, my sense of loss, and my little accomplishments a little better. So I'm not with the didactic novelist as teacher of Achebe, but then I'm not...
The idea of sort of fiction as a search for accuracy, especially for a lot of readers. I was reading a review, someone was reviewing your book, and the person says, Ali artfully comments on some of the issues besieging the country. Ali offers his possible causes. While we may take Ali upon some, fewer are closer to the truth. And you did mention, it is fiction. And this sort of push and pull of where the readers are searching for accuracy through the writer, so to speak.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. A few months ago, I was in Kigali with a client of mine, and he's a non-fiction writer. He wrote a memoir. He's like the Fulani. He's Tutsi, so the cattle people of Rwanda and from the Ugandan border. So he wrote non-fiction, and I edited it for him. And then he looks at me and very seriously asks me, Richard, these novelists and fiction writers, where do they get their stories from? So I sip my coffee and then I look at him. I tell him that fiction writers and novelists are all bloody liars. You can't be looking for truth there. It's not there for you to find. But there is something that you try to do, because both, and of course the second sentence to him was that both you and the fiction writer have the same material. It's the same lived experience, only that you have the burden of veracity in a way, and he looks at it as a burden, and you look at it as something that you aspire to. So in terms of that, I have to, because I am writing something akin to historical fiction, so I'm interested in the broad timelines. But the fact that I am trying to situate it within an experience that a lot of people have, had, I do not want them to go and look for the truth there, but more like a mirror. And the trick about a mirror is, in a mirror, the left side becomes the right side. You've got this little distortion, and it is in those emphases, those little distortions, that the truth itself becomes even more apparent. So while you might say that the person who is writing nonfiction is, he creates a window in a wall and you can look in and see it as it is, the novelist creates a mirror. And it's in those little tricks of light, it's in those little subversions of the novelist that you get to see the truth, we hope, more keenly.
Tony.
The guy has confused me.
Carnivorous City also has its, it also, in many ways, as much as it's fiction, almost also reads like a travelogue, and you're going through this sort of maze and, labyrinth of Lagos, and you're dropping sort of history along the way about the different spaces. And of course, there are people that are looking to that as accuracy, especially if people that haven't lived in that city before. And it's like, oh, this book is not just a novel, it's almost like a travel guide as well. And I'm sure there are people that would want to contest certain history that you put in or those sorts of things. Do you ever feel any sort of pressure or any antagonism towards, have you ever felt it before with regards in fiction as accuracy?
In writing this book, I wanted to act like a cartographer who people make maps, and I deliberately, give out real places, real street names, real situations. In fact, a month ago, somebody actually said he was reading the book and he drove from VI to Badula, Morocco area, and then he couldn't find a house. And that's just right after Ayo's house. And I'm like, so you think I will show you the house, But, I mean, he actually traced the whole, right past Oliver the Coke to the place. So I wanted to do that because I just thought I should do, a love song to Lagos. Basically, that's what it was. Just like, say, this city I've lived in and I've loved it. Let me just, write a story about it. So ultimately, in 4 or 5 years, people will not even, cities change. So some of those landmarks will be gone. Because, back in the days in Lagos, when I first came to Lagos, before they started putting street signs, somebody would say to you, my house is next to it. And I just asked, if they move that drum, what happens? So, and that's the history of cities, You have these landmarks that you create for yourself, and then they disappear, and then things just change. So, accuracy in that sense, yes, I was looking for that. But in terms of writing a novel, what you want to do is very similar to, make it as real to life as possible. It's never life because, like you said, like looking in the mirror and then, there's that distortion. So we don't aim, I don't aim for fidelity, in that sense.
And of course, we're talking about big cities and the sort of endless possibilities about writing about those spaces. In many ways, cities are sort of palimpsests. They're layered with memories, they're layered with history, and we as a country have very sort of complex geographical and cultural histories as well, and sort of muddled up borders. Why are fiction writers not here? Why are we not exploring so much more of our cities in our fiction?
Well, cities.
Yes, why? Because I'm reading, I'm reading these books, and I'm like, I feel like I want to go to those places. I feel like I'm in those spaces. I'm traveling. It's like a astral travel of sorts. So
I'm not sure there's any city.
Not to prescribe writing to people, but I'm just wondering why it is that we're not exploring.
I'm not sure there's any city in the world that has been in Africa that has been put in fiction as much as Lagos. Almost every novel you see wants to be. So now that people are beginning to write from outside Lagos, Lagos was like the de facto city for novels, But then, what's happening now is that people are beginning to also move out and talk about other cities, other metropolises, other, Kano is an exciting city to write about. So is Kaduna. So is Jos. So is Ibadan. My first novella was set in Jos, partly then in Lagos. So. And even this one also partly in Jos, because I keep going back to Jos. In fact, I actually know why Richard is on this panel. I grew up in Kano. I went to school in Jos, so he's been stalking me all the while, and he stalked me here. So there are so many cities, in Nigeria to write about. But then, you also have to write about lived experience. As writing about fiction, you have to know where. Somebody said to me she wants to write about Abuja, the way I do about Lagos. I can't do that. Abuja is somewhere I go to 5 days, I'm gone. But Lagos is where I've lived for 20-something years. So you have to understand the city to be able to bring it to life, even though it's fiction, or else it will just fall flat.
Yeah, I think your question on why we don't explore cities, particularly city as palimpsest, it's one of those words I have problems with. It's a very tricky word. I think it's because it's a victim of this idea of certainty being convenient, in the sense that we like to have a certain version of things, and because if you interrogate those things, it's going to bring up other things which you don't want to, so you hold on to that narrow definition and say that's all it is. We see this in the identity politics, where everybody wants to be Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, or any of the 100 ethnic groups. You see that a lot. You see that when somebody says, oh, I'm from Ekiti State, I'm from the next state, and therefore, even though we've lived here together for so long, you are the other person. But when you look at it, if you go back 100 years, 50 years, 200 years, these demarcations that we so insist on, that we're so interested in killing ourselves about, that we're so interested in excluding others from, did not exist. They are just lines in the sand, which like cardinal points, do not really mean anything. Why is north north? Why is south south? Why is east east? East from where? If I'm coming from Mars, is north still north? Where is it? Is the north still north from Niger Republic, and so on? So this interrogation, which will see us see things differently, we don't want to take the mental and physical effort to do them. So we prefer to say, okay, this is it, and we just say it that way, and that is that. But it's very convenient. But if you're from central Nigeria, and if you come from somebody with my family history that has been very, very liberal in sharing their blood across centuries, that have moved from one part of the country to the other part of the country, why would you choose one particular narrative of a city when it is not true to your experience? So Jos was founded by a lot of people. You had autochthonous people, but then you had Yoruba people and Hausa people and Nupe people who came for the railways to come and sit down and make a living. And over years they blended across religions and all of that. But increasingly you now have the situation which we have now. And the whole point of City of Memories is to make that back step, because the central point of City of Memories is this. We have a situation of crisis, we have a situation of a chaos. So it's the duty of the level-headed people to step back into a city of memory, a point before the chaos happened, and try and sort of preempt it. That's the central idea of it. So the reason why this is done is because it's convenient. But I don't want that sort of false convenience. It is not true to my experience. And I want to believe that people who care about cities and about the sorts of cosmopolis quality to cities will not opt for that convenience. They would want to interrogate and show a more nuanced portrayal of how we got here.
Well, let me just say something about what Richard said about, about cities and stuff, right? And the stories we tell. There's more authenticity in the stories we tell now than when I was growing up. I remember that growing up, almost every novel in Nigeria, if your name was Tunde, your surname would be Williams. It was like normal. I mean, because we didn't want to say Tunde Balogun or something. But now you see people are writing novels that you have two Igbo names, two outside. I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's beginning to reflect a Nigerianness that was lacking before in the novel. I mean, before we thought that a character in the novel had to be, somehow. And that somehow meant he had to be educated and have some kind of, affectation and, foreignness to him. Sorry.
Right, I'm sure we want to hear what the novels sound like, right? So we're going to do a bit of reading.
She go and buy it.
Yeah. And then we will come back to the questions. So who's going to go first?
Tony is my big brother.
Okay. Tika will go first. So Tony will be reading from Carnivorous City.
Okay. Since our panel is about cities, I'm going to read just a very short bit about Lagos. So Abel and Santos are going to a strip joint. Don't worry, we won't go to the strip joint. Abdul Karim, we'll get there. So driving in Lagos at night revealed it to be a small city with a distended belly. You could drive from Lekki to the airport in less than 30 minutes if you had a voracious appetite for speed. But in the daytime, Lagos was sluggish like a python that had swallowed something huge. The traffic was something huge, clogging the gut of the city. The roads were bad and the arteries few. So once one was clogged, the others would be too, causing a gridlock. The roads were free that night, but the streets were active. Coming into a Keja from Mamali Macantoni, Santos drove into Okwebi through the road that turned right beside the Sheraton Hotel. There were cars parked everywhere, and if you wound down and listened, you could hear fast-paced music pulsating. It was a Friday, and people were actively seeking fun. Gently swaying men and women hung around in clusters, talking or making out, feverish hands riding up short skirts. Lagos nights could be like that, shrouded under a haze of bacchanalia. Allen was more animated, more in the moment. All these girls now, Shao, Santos said, as they drove past the Allen roundabout. Give them 100 naira, they will give you good time. Abel stole a quick look at him and wondered what Santos defined as good time. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll read from a bit the fictional. There are two cities in the book, Jos and Bolewa. Bolewa is entirely fictional, and I found out it's an ethnic group later on, not a place eventually, in Fika Emirates, so it tells you something. So I'm going to explore that, the fictional city, and I think it shows the city as space for memories and the human element of cities. So just about a page. In Bolewa, the houses were packed close together, and with the exception of the main street that led out of town and thence to Maiduguri, all the streets were narrow. Yet each house was not enclosed like Hajiaha was where he lodged, had space around it. Farouk thought it was the narrowness of the streets rather than the proximity of the houses to each other that gave the town a packed quality. There were 8 wards in Bolewa, each about a kilometer square. His ward was Wuza, a recent addition to the town. In his ward was the college, built in the late 70s, and a health center. At night, every corner was turned into tea and coffee houses, where men sat in makeshift stalls that served as their rendezvous. Though Bolewa could be hot in the daytime, the evenings became exceedingly cold and were always dusty from July to August and in the ember months. Females were seldom seen outside their houses after 8 p.m. Farouk set off for Bama, the next word. As he walked along, one or the other of the city's 3 buses passed him on its route through the town. Dog boys were always perched precariously on the open side doors of the buses as they made their hasty way past him in a pointless rivalry for fares that would always be there. Bama, like the next word, Danzazo, was a residential quarter with a primary school, a few shops, and plenty of salesmen pushing or pulling large carts of assorted wear ranging from nail cutters to kerosene lantern wicks and such. There were many women about. Some women drove past him in cars while others sat in front of their houses. It was about 10 a.m. and most were resting from the morning chores with their children safely off to school, gathering strength to prepare the afternoon meal. In Bolewa, one could say a lot about the women from what they wore. If a lady wore a lapaya, she was married and was most probably Kanuri. Sometimes he teased these girls by saying wushe. He was wished hello back enough times to confirm he was correct. The woman could, of course, be sure. Margi women hardly wore the lapaya, their preference being flowing gowns of blue, black, or gray silk material. They never wore hijabs either and were wont to drape their faces with a white lace gele, covering their hair and their shoulders, but leaving their necks and faces bare. More often than not, Fulani women wore print wrappers around their waists, together with the matching monocolor dresses, and of course, they had their tribe's scarifications on their cheeks and were sure to have henna designs, some faded, some new, on their hands. But the girls were a different story, for one could never guess who was from where. Some were impudent and flirted with their eyes as he passed by, while others, more conservative, kept their gazes lowered to the ground, seeing everything. Many wore jeans but had sometimes t-shirts. Most covered their hair with a playfully looped gele that left just a bit of the promise of hair. Once, a nubile Fulani distracted him. She was chewing tobacco leaves, as many did, and carried a black cellophane bag over the top of which spring onions peaked. What struck him from afar was her complexion, brown like cardboard packing, the color of Rahila palm.
Really kind of excerpts that epitomize the cities as characters as well. And I want to know about sort of your challenges in that, and even the possibilities that you experience trying to write about these spaces as characters. And most especially for the benefit of those who are interested in writing here in this room.
Okay, two things have happened in this book, right? The first one, when I said I was trying to be faithful to locations and locales, you know. First thing is, if you read Nigerian novels about Lagos, it comes from a failure to comprehend the get of Lagos. Lagos is huge. And then so it's like somebody gives you a huge meal on the table with everything, and you're just confused. Where does that eating from? So people tend to like, I mean, you can see it in Chris Abani's book, in Mike Nwosu's book, in Helen's book. It's everywhere. They try to make it more than it already is. It's already a crazy place. Why make it crazier than it is? So I try to avoid that. You know, I wanted to make it as real as possible. And people also, I mean, this is crazy. It can't happen in Lagos, but that's Lagos for you. So for me, I was careful to avoid that trap of, you know, making it more phantasmagoria than it was already. Then, secondly, in writing about a city like Lagos, you now have to look at what to add and what to take away. Now, if you also look at all the books about Lagos before now, they were either set on the mainland or on the island. You hardly saw stories that had the mainland and the island in one narrative. And and that was because people who live on the mainland don't have a good handle on the island. And people who live on the island just drive past to the mainland to go to the airport. So it was like, these were like two distinct places in one city. So I wanted to, and so that's how it came about. How do you now get a story that marries these two disparate parts of the city? And then I had to get somebody who had done his 419 in the mainland and then was spending his money on the island. So that was something I found. So cities present that kind of, because there are places I've been to Lagos, if I tell people, they say, no, it's not true now. You know, it's not true about this Lagos, you know, but that's how Lagos is. It just presents you with, okay, so let me tell you guys a story. 3 weeks ago, I went to a party and my phone was stolen from me by area boys. Where Damajayi? Damajayi, yeah. Dami was there with me. So they stole my phone. I had driven off and got into Ikoyi when I found out that my phone was missing. Now, if I had written this story, the people would say it's not true. So I turned back and came back to where I was robbed. And then my phone had been stolen. So Dami was with me. Then we came out of the place, and I saw one of the guys. And I just rushed him and started beating him, you know. So I dragged him into back in the concert arena. And then I just started beating him. And I gave him the phone. I said, call your friends. I'm beating him, and he's calling his friends. And Dami sent a text and said, we'll kill Olumide if you don't bring our phone. You know, and this was about 11 o'clock, right? By 3:34, my phone came back.
Okay.
You can buy the book when it comes out.
Yeah, I think all the experiences of a city and try and find out what the core thing about the city is. And then when we have that, then we already know the physical cues. We know what follows what. After Rampam Street is Amadou Bello Way. After Rampam Street, it can't be this. There are bookshops on Rampam Street. The museum is, the zoo is on this side. You have that whole physical cartography of the novel. But what is the core of a city? And for me, this was the most important thing when I was writing City of Memories. And for me, the core of Jos as a quality of the city is that if you are walking down Amadou Bello Way in Jos, you sidestep somebody or you bump into somebody, he will tell you good morning, and wish you a good day, and you go on with your day. it's not an impersonal space. Just it's a very human level interaction, and that's for me the warmth of the city, and that is exactly what is lost now. All right, and when I finally knew that I couldn't really stay in Jos anymore was at the start of the crisis when bombs were going off in cars, going to blow up and kill me. When you get a sense of that, the same city where people say good morning, and you now think that a random car is going to blow up and kill you, it has thoroughly destroyed the fabric of the city. And once you figure that out, once you've meditated that core of the city to yourself as a novelist, as a person who is interested in writing about it, then exploring the physical aspects of the city and creating the characters to give your particular emphasis to bring it to life becomes easier. So for me, it's about that core of a city. Once you figure out that, then you can go on from there.
Tony, you mentioned earlier how in novels that had been written before, it seemed characters had to be affected in some way, whether they had to be foreign, had foreign names and those kinds of things. And in a way, I mean, I'm just wondering whether it's a sort of nationalism that's sort of happening with literature.
Yeah, I mean, if that's how you explain it and it's correct, then I'll be happy. But I think that it's also this whole thing about people trying to become more Igbo, more Yoruba, more it might be. But, you know, I just felt that people should be more authentic in creating characters than people their books. That's what I thought. Of course, I mean, if you read Anna Achebe, for instance, or what's his name, Pawan Drinkard, you know, you didn't expect him to be anything different. But I'm talking about the educated writers who came up, who, you know, began to write these books about the cosmopolitan characters who had to have education and some kind of foreign name, you know, and as if the novels did not have poor people as characters, you know, in that sense. It was like anybody who had been in a novel had to be somebody who had been to school and who had a certain middle class pedigree. So that has changed a lot. But in terms of the authentic African names coming in, I mean, look at Richard's book, look at Born on a Tuesday, look at Crimson Blossoms, and you know, you just see people who you can relate to. This is not talk about Williams or Philip Johnson. These are people that you know. You know who they are. You know how they. I mean, where they live. You can smell and taste their experiences. And I think that's, for me, it's made the novels much more interesting for us. And I think that's. I also think that's why people are beginning to enjoy the novels we produce. Yeah.
I think the question really I wanted to ask was leading me to about this issue of affectation was looking at language.
Okay.
And something I feel like you both share in your novels is language is interesting and simple. And I want to use the word accessible, but I often find it that when people use the word accessible, some people find it offensive in some way or feel like a book is being demeaned. But that's, so basically in a nutshell, that's not what I mean. But when I mean accessible, I mean there was a time where when a lot of books were written, the language just was extremely complex and heavy and headache-inducing, and you had to carve a dictionary next to you. But so I'm also wondering, is there something deliberate about the kind of language you choose to express yourself in now, especially with your novels? Because it feels it's something that feels easy, poetic at the same time, but also feels easy.
I would say that I'm not very sure how much this is a deliberate love, and then we come about with our own sense of what is beautiful. For example, I like Michael Ondaatje's writing. I like James Codzier's writing. I'm interested in language. I'm interested in beautiful sentences. I'm interested in being able to express a reality in the very, very best way that I can, and this come across. But the funny thing is, if you want to publish a book, you are not particularly the most important person there. The reader is extremely important, because you're essentially saying, come let me fool you. Come let me create a fictional magic world in which you will enter and meet these wonderful and bad people, and which you will get to know them. So you cannot use that sort of language. You can't use Adebayo Williams type of language. You can't do that. You can't do Benokri in Starbook, which is thoroughly inaccessible. You can't do that. But you have to have your readers in mind and try and create that sort of fictional world into which they can enter. So it's important to make an effort, but then you also have your own artistic concerns with creating language that is beautiful and memorable. Then on the issue of multiplicity of voices, I think I'm with Tony Khan on this. For a long time, national narratives of Nigeria have been centered around Lagos to a large extent. And then over the last, I like to think that the generation of writing that started with Helen Habila's 2001 Kane Prize win, I like to think that we now have a multiplicity of perspectives. You've got novels being set in the East, Ukamaka Olisakwe, Chimamanda Adichie, my book, Abubakar's book, which are set in Jos, El Nathan's book, Zaria. And these multiple characters, these multiple locales for fiction, they contribute to it. They diversify the national narrative, yes, but they are also authentically African narratives. So if we were to create a map of, the locales of African writing, the space where Nigeria is, which used to be just one dot called Lagos, now we have Lagos, we have Kaduna, we have Owerri, we have Kano, we have Zaria. And if we are interested, and I believe Africa is a country. I actually believe it's a country the size of a continent. It's a huge island. I believe Africa is a country. So if we have of this country. So I think the multiplicity of voices is a very good thing, and particularly because I believe Africa is a country, and because I believe that narratives as diverse as possible are important.
Thank you. Tony, what's your take on language and accessibility?
About Africa being a country. In the past 6 months, Richard has been to Kigali, Nairobi, Tanzania, Uganda. So to him, it's one country. I haven't been to those places, so they are different countries. But yesterday somebody read a poem here, and he said, "I know one wash you." Or something, yeah. You know, be washed. So, I'm sure that maybe 3 years ago, if he had said that, people were like, "What are you talking about?" I think imagine a national language, and it's the language of the youth and of the streets, and that is what you see across all the novels that are coming out now. It's not purely English, it's a hybrid, and we speak it, and we know it and understand it. It might go above the head of our fathers, but for us who are living and loving and working now, we understand what that means. So I think it's changing in so many ways, providing an alternative, lingo, to the English we write in. So we write in English that people know, but we also have a street English that people also understand, and there's no need for a glossary at the end of the book or one of our footnotes. So I think that's already imagined, and I think music and movies have helped, and it's now percolating down into literature. So in that sense, you talk about people writing difficult language. I studied English 2 degrees, so you can imagine why I have gray hair. It was those things I read. But I think in those days, people also felt that we know that a novel is actually an artificial construct. We know. But when you write it, you don't want people to see it when they read it. You want them to experience it as a different reality, So, but I think, I was saying to somebody, I said, see, for those of us who write and who read African Writer Series, it's God that helped us. But those people wrote terrible books. I'm sorry to say. Some of the books are actually terrible. Go back to them now. Very, very, very bad books. But
he said it's quoting.
Yeah, I did. I did. But because they were just like trying to force down something into your head, and in some particular ways. But look at the books that people are writing now. They are alive. You read them, you feel that this is something speaking to you. It doesn't feel as if it's. In fact, that's why, he said, called his name, because he thinks he's actually part of that process. In the books we read, when we were young, it was like this thing was here. Sonny. I said, sorry, Sonny, I heard about him. Because it feels almost as if he's somebody you could bump into on the next street. And that's what I think we've done with our writing now. We've humanized it in a way that's made it almost real to us. It wasn't there before at all.
But why do people...
Can I just add something? Yeah, and this idea of an evolving culture is also important. While we were doing the Jalad of the youngest of us, and he's very hippie, and he puts up this music on the boombox, and I live for city, Baba, hold your guns, hold your waist. And I was like, what sort of music is this? And he says, what? You're from Nigeria and you don't know that Alajo Shomolu song. So there's this vibrancy, whether you see it in the films, in the music, in the language. The Kenyans have this thing called Sheng. It's not even Swahili anymore. It's moved on to Sheng. So there's this idea of experimentation. There's this idea of trying to capture what is really happening at the pulse of the moment. And I think it's an African thing that's been going on for a while now.
But I think that there's still sort of camps and people who feel that it's not literary until it's sort of elevated language and in some way inaccessible.
No, yeah, but I sympathize with such people.
The people who believe such things are not here.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, okay. Okay, we'll give you a microphone soon.
And speaking of giving the microphone, we're going to open it up to the audience. Please, if you have any, do we have anyone to?
But sorry, it's funny what I think it was you who mentioned Benokri and Starbook. But if you read Benokri's first novel, no, Flowers and Shadows, okay. or The Landscapes Within, yeah. He was just like us.
Yes.
Just like us. Then
so what happened with Starbucks?
He won the Booker and got the OB, and then he became a philosopher.
Do we have a spare microphone that's going to go around? Oh wow, we have. So let's start from this side, and we'll take the gentleman. We'll take about 3 questions each. Gentleman over there, and then here, so that we don't forget the questions, right?
Okay.
Okay.
This man asks very hard questions. I know him.
Good morning, everyone.
It's working.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Solomon. I have some questions for the speakers here, but I like asking personal questions. I don't know why. Now,
so let us know who you're directing your question towards.
Both of them.
Okay.
We are both in trouble.
Okay. The first question, just 2 questions. Sorry, they are.
Well, let's make it quick so that we can go around the room. Okay?
Now, the first question is: some writers write as a form of a therapy, or to put around a belief system, or to smuggle in an idea. Do you write for any? Okay, the question is: do you write for any such comforting effects? The second question is: some writers write in specific places or time, like the African American writer Toni Morrison. Lives in a house that borders on the Hutchinson River, and she writes in the morning because the gurgling of the water sounds as a soundtrack to her. The American writer Ernest Hemingway wrote his masterpiece somewhere around Cuba. That's Old Man the Sea. Then the English writer Rudyard Kipling wrote.
What's the question?
Wrote the Jungle Book. Sorry, I'm going to finish now. Wrote the Jungle Book during his stay in America. Now, the question is, which condition is most favorable for you to write your stories? Which condition or time?
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. We'll just pass the microphone to the other gentleman. Oh, but just pass it to the gentleman there. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I came in late and caught the piece about language, which all the time interests me. Most of us here are poets, even if other people believe we are not. We write poetry privately and we never get to publish them. Yesterday, Lola fished me out and made me a poet. I know I'm a novelist, I'm a published novelist, but I have not published one poem. Now, the difference between these two is that the liberty of being obscure, the liberty of experimenting with words, the liberty of trying to say simple things in convoluted ways is a preserve of poetry. Now, when we are writing a novel, even if we are informed, like my friend Richard said, by other people, we should know that our own disposition as writers actually is to be read. It's therapeutic, no doubt about it, at personal level, is to be read. Now, the question now is simple. How do you, as a writer, know when to do away with your own influence and carry on your readers along? You understand? The printed word on page, I'm sure there's something we call reader-friendly. Reader-friendly is not just about spacing and paragraphs. It's about accessibility of words. How do you now jettison those writers who you love so much